I walked into my husband's company's lavish party carrying a gift, only to find his wealthy boss down on one knee, asking, "Will you leave your broke, useless wife and marry me instead?" And Henry, without hesitation, said yes. I slipped out quietly, cancelled everything in my name, and pulled my 6 to 7% stake from the company. $207 million gone in an instant. Minutes later, my phone showed 27 missed calls, and someone was pounding at my door. I zipped up my black evening gown for tonight's gala while Henry's phone buzzed non-stop with messages from Christian Blackwood, Boston's most ruthless venture capitalist, spelling out their strategy to wreck my marriage for profit. The proposal was timed to explode right in the middle of my keynote speech. One text read like a clinical report: "Her public breakdown will justify the ownership restructuring we agreed on." On the dresser sat the vintage Omega watch I had bought Henry for our anniversary, a gift that now felt like a prop in the cruel play I had been cast in. The silk of my dress clung to me like armor as I absorbed what I had just read. In the marble bathroom, Henry hummed to himself while adjusting his bow tie, oblivious to the fact that his phone had exposed 6 months of planning. The messages laid out every step of their scheme. Henry and his boss plotting my public humiliation to steal control of Nexus Dynamics, the company I had built with my Harvard law training and coding skills. My hand brushed over the box that once held that $25,000 watch. Henry had once mentioned how much he admired vintage Swiss craftsmanship. I had spent weeks hunting for the perfect gift while he spent those same weeks arranging my corporate execution with a woman who saw our marriage as nothing but a business obstacle to erase. "Isabella, have you seen my cufflinks?" Henry called casually from the bathroom, his tone carrying the relaxed confidence of a man convinced his secrets were safe. I pulled the platinum cufflinks from his jewelry box, my hand steady despite the earthquake inside me. They bore the Nexus Dynamics logo, a symbol I had designed back in our startup days when partnership still meant equality, not stagecraft. Our penthouse reflected 6 years of growth. From the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor to the Italian leather furniture and original artwork worth more than most people made in a year, but what those polished surfaces couldn't show was the truth locked in our safe. I owned 6 to 7% of the company, Henry only 33. My grandmother's inheritance had funded our first operations, and my work had generated every cent since. Elena Santos, who once worked 3 jobs to start a tiny tech firm in the 1980s, had left me her life savings and a handwritten note in Spanish: "Construí algo que import. Y nunca dejes que nadie se lleve el crédito por tu trabajo. Build something that matters, and never let anyone take credit for your work." Her words rang in my head now, bitter with irony. I had upheld her financial legacy but betrayed her lesson. She had sacrificed everything for me, only for her granddaughter to vanish from her own story. Meanwhile, Henry rehearsed his keynote for tonight's investor gala, flipping through slides covered with my research notes, my explanations, my breakthroughs. The neural network architecture, the innovation he would present as his own, was something I had created during 18-hour coding marathons while he courted investors at conferences. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. Isabella Martinez, Harvard law graduate turned computer scientist, had been reduced to a supporting role in her own biography. The black evening gown hugging me was paid for with patent royalties, all filed with my name as the inventor. Yet tonight, I would stand on the sidelines at our company's biggest event, Henry's wife instead of the architect of the technology being celebrated. My walk-in closet was full of outfits carefully chosen for corporate theater, dresses that framed me as a supportive spouse rather than a visionary entrepreneur. Tonight's gown was the perfect example, elegant for photographs, but safe, designed to keep me decorative and non-threatening. Henry stepped out of the bathroom looking like the perfect tech mogul, polished and styled to perfection. "You look beautiful tonight," he said, the words empty, automatic. His eyes showed no guilt, no hesitation. Either he was a master actor or he had completely compartmentalized his betrayal. I wondered how many mornings he had stared at me while planning my downfall. That watch, that anniversary gift, now symbolized 6 years of misplaced trust and my willful blindness. I remembered our early days. Hours hours spent debating new ideas and strategies, his questions full of curiosity, my excitement feeding off his attention. Slowly, those exchanges turned into one-sided tutorials. I explained complex concepts, he scribbled notes, and later presented them as his own. The shift had been so gradual I mistook intellectual theft for partnership. Until tonight, the pattern had been easy to deny, but the truth in our home safe was undeniable: the corporation papers I had drafted, with legal expertise Henry never possessed, clearly established my majority ownership of Nexus Dynamics and the patent filings that bore my name. Every major innovation that brought in $310 million a year was credited to me as the primary inventor. The bank records proved my grandmother's inheritance had been the seed money that turned Henry's ambitions into a functioning company. Those documents were hard numbers, proof in a world where perception, branding, and PR often mattered more than facts. The irony of preparing for my own corporate funeral while keeping up the act of a supportive wife gave the night a surreal edge. I applied my makeup like clockwork, each stroke of foundation and lipstick creating the mask of a devoted spouse ready to cheer on her husband's success. In the mirror, I looked flawless, poised, loyal, picture perfect, yet I was anything but ready for the systematic destruction Christian Blackwood had plotted with surgical precision. My phone lit up with 17 missed calls from my assistant, Sarah Kim, alongside urgent texts about technical issues that needed my attention. The neural network optimization project, the one slated for our next product launch, had started showing anomalies. Troubleshooting those kinds of algorithmic problems required my expertise Henry didn't have. Tonight, though, I would sit in the crowd while he collected applause for breakthroughs he couldn't explain, let alone replicate. His entire reputation balanced on the foundations I had laid, brick by brick, during sleepless nights spent perfecting code. The elevator ride to the garage was quiet, giving me a moment of solitude before the performance began. Henry filled the silence with chatter about investor expectations and networking opportunities. His voice animated with anticipation of recognition and new deals. I held the box containing the Omega watch, knowing I was about to watch months of scheming come to fruition. My life's work would be handed off like merchandise, reduced to an asset to acquire rather than a partnership to value. The limousine rolled out toward the Indian Grand Hotel, where 300 of Boston's most powerful figures would gather to toast another year of success for Nexus Dynamics. City lights blurred past the tinted windows. I understood now. This wasn't an anniversary celebration, it was a staged corporate coup disguised as entertainment. The perfect life we had built together was nothing but theater, financed by my genius and safeguarded by my silence. Henry's phone buzzed again and again, each vibration pulling at my chest like a warning bell. The device sat between us on the leather seat like a loaded gun. Screen flashing with incoming texts he silenced without reading, his fingers moved with the speed of practice. Too smooth, too rehearsed. Making it clear this had become his routine. Just the final guest list, he said casually, though I noticed he hadn't actually opened the message. His voice carried that strained casualness I had come to recognize, the tone of someone juggling too many lies. Over the past few months, I had been bombarded with these little half-truths, small inconsistencies brushed off as nothing, but the phone calls that started 3 weeks ago told a different story. I would walk into the kitchen and hear him speaking in hushed tones, only for the call to end abruptly. He'd tell me it was investors or board members. But his posture told me otherwise. He leaned forward when he spoke, his voice dropping into tones that belonged in intimate conversations, not business negotiations. When I pressed for details, his answers were vague, inconsistent, and riddled with contradictions. Christian has some brilliant ideas for expanding our market reach, Henry said one evening, his enthusiasm impossible to miss. The way he said her name had shifted over the weeks, from professional respect to something more reverent, almost personal. Christian Blackwood commanded attention wherever she went. Her reputation as Boston's most formidable venture capitalist came from aggressive acquisitions and an instinct for ruthless deals. Henry's obsession with her had crept in quietly at first. Now, it dominated every conversation about the company's future, preparing for tonight's gala, I had watched him try on 3 different suits, asking for my opinion with a nervousness that had nothing to do with our anniversary. His questions weren't about us. They were about which outfit would look best under stage lighting, which fabric photographed better. He was dressing for her approval, not mine. "Did you know Christian started her first company at 24? He asked at one point. I hadn't asked for her biography. Yet he offered it like trivia I should care about. When his phone buzzed again, I caught a glimpse of her name on the screen before he quickly turned it face down. Their communication had become constant. Texts at all hours, even weekends and early mornings, times no one would expect from a purely professional relationship. As the limousine passed the Nexus Dynamics headquarters, a tower I had built with sleepless coding nights and algorithms crafted from scratch. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was staring at my own life's work from the back seat of a car bought with its profits, on my way to an event where someone else would take credit. And the shift wasn't only at home. In the office, I had noticed conversations falling silent when I entered, groups of employees breaking apart suddenly, their guarded looks making it obvious I was the subject of discussions I wasn't supposed to overhear. My own technical team seemed distracted during recent project reviews. The usual spark of excitement over breakthroughs had been replaced by a current of tension I couldn't ignore. Even Sarah Kim, my trusted assistant and one of our best engineers, had begun asking pointed questions about my long-term plans for the company. Her inquiries felt less like casual curiosity and more like reconnaissance. Marcus Webb, Henry's assistant, had grown especially uneasy around me. His normally polished professionalism was replaced by awkward eye avoidance and clipped answers whenever I asked about meeting schedules or document prep. Just yesterday, I walked into Henry's office and caught Marcus slamming his laptop shut. His flustered excuse about confidential investor materials did little to explain his discomfort with me being there. Investor materials for tonight's gala had already been finalized without my review or signature. A break from the protocol we'd set years ago, where both co-founders signed off on strategic presentations. The documents I glimpsed suggested ownership restructuring that would push me to the margins while giving outside venture capital firms greater leverage. At the center of these plans was Christian Blackwood's investment group, positioned to turn Nexus Dynamics from an independent powerhouse into her next acquisition. "She really gets the vision for scaling our operations," Henry had told me, his choice of pronouns saying everything. He no longer said I when discussing Christian, now it was we. That shift suggested a partnership that went beyond consulting, creeping into the territory of shared ownership in decisions where, as majority stakeholder, I should have had the final word. The Omega watch sat in its velvet box on my lap. Once, it symbolized 6 years of marriage. Now it felt like evidence of my own naivete. Henry was distracted all day, his answers to my questions vague, his tone distant. The atmosphere in our penthouse felt hollow, as if we were already living separate lives while occupying the same rooms. When I asked where I'd be seated during dinner, knowing the board assignments had been locked weeks ago, his hesitation told me everything. The evening's logistics had been designed to keep me out of key conversations. The limousine turned onto Argenton Street, closing the distance to the Meridian Grand Hotel, where 300 guests were already gathered. I understood now. This wasn't about celebrating our company's success, or our marriage. Henry was preparing for a performance, not an anniversary. His nervous energy filled the car's confined space as he adjusted his bow tie, glancing into the partition mirror one last time. My phone buzzed again. 3 missed calls from Sarah, plus urgent texts about anomalies in the neural network optimization project, issues that could derail our next launch, problems only I could solve, not Henry. The timing felt deliberate, as if engineered to keep me occupied while the spotlight shifted away from me. The Omega box grew heavier in my hands. What had once been a gift of love was now a weight of dread. 6 years of marriage had taught me to read Henry's moods. And in recent weeks I had seen a level of deception I never thought him capable of. The man next to me was no longer a partner. He was a stranger orchestrating my removal from both my marriage and my company. The limousine pulled into the hotel's circular drive, where valets rushed to manage the stream of luxury cars. Through tinted windows, I watched Boston's elite step onto the red carpet, their designer gowns and tailored tuxedos gleaming under the floodlights. The facade glowed with warmth. Like a stage set, complete with photographers ready to capture every arrival for tomorrow's business headlines. Henry straightened his bow tie again as our driver opened the door. "Remember to smile for the cameras," he said, though his own face looked taut beneath his practiced charm. The Omega watch in my purse felt like an anchor with every step. The ballroom doors opened, revealing chandeliers glittering above polished marble floors, casting fractured light across 300 guests. The air buzzed with ambition, deals whispered beneath champagne laughter. Normally, that symphony of networking energized me. Tonight it felt like a storm gathering. Henry's hand settled lightly on my back as we entered, his smile camera-ready, but his eyes were already scanning the crowd. For someone else, Isabella. "You look stunning tonight," said Margaret Chin, a board member whose husband ran one of Boston's largest investment firms. Her words were polite, automatic. Her attention fixed on Henry's reactions rather than mine. The shift in social dynamics around us made it clear others had seen cracks in my marriage long before I admitted them myself. Waiters floated through the room with champagne flutes and trays of canapés, the kind of catering budget usually reserved for celebrating major corporate victories. The guest list read like a who's who of New England venture capital. Joined by executives from tech companies whose partnerships could push Nexus Dynamics from successful startup to market leader. The sheer scale of the evening signaled intentions far beyond an anniversary party. "There's Christian," Henry said, his voice carrying a warmth that made my chest tighten. Christian Blackwood entered the ballroom like she owned it, her presence snapping conversations into sharp focus as guests angled themselves for introductions. Her reputation as Boston's most powerful venture capitalist preceded her, but tonight she radiated an even greater authority. As if this gathering had been staged just for her, dinner service moved with military precision. Each course timed to keep conversation flowing while building anticipation for what came next. I was seated at the head table beside Henry, positioned with a perfect view of the stage where keynote speeches would celebrate another year of growth and innovation. The seating chart seemed designed less for honor and more to guarantee I was visible for whatever spectacle had been planned. Throughout dinner, Henry's phone buzzed again and again. Each notification made him flinch, his attention split between smiling for appearances and monitoring developments I couldn't see. His distracted responses to my questions only deepened the hollow distance between us. The man next to me no longer resembled my husband. His loyalties had shifted into something I didn't recognize, something that threatened everything we had built. "Ladies and gentlemen," the master of ceremonies announced as dessert was cleared, the stage lights shifting, "please welcome Christian Blackwood, whose vision for strategic partnerships continues to redefine how we approach technology, investment, and innovation." Applause erupted as Christian strode to the podium, her confidence magnetic. She spoke with ease, her voice carrying clearly across the ballroom. At first, her remarks followed the familiar corporate script: collaboration, shared vision, transformative growth, but then her tone shifted, the words grew personal, drawing the entire room forward with hungry anticipation. The atmosphere sharpened, electric, almost predatory. 300 guests leaned in as though they could sense blood in the water. Then, in one rehearsed motion, Christian stepped away from the podium, dropped to one knee, and pulled out a ring. Gasps swept through the ballroom, conversations died instantly. The crowd had been waiting for this. "Henry Martinez," Christian said, her voice echoing off the marble with surgical precision, "will you leave your poor, impotent wife and marry me?" The words hit like blows. Around me, 300 phones rose in unison, recording my humiliation from every angle. In that moment, I wasn't the majority shareholder or the architect of our success. I was branded poor and impotent, stripped of identity, reduced to nothing but an obstacle, a character assassination, carefully staged, to justify the corporate restructuring that would erase me from my own story. Henry's acceptance came without hesitation, his voice rang out, clear, firm, final. As he said yes to a woman who had just gutted my dignity in front of Boston's most powerful business leaders, The word cracked against marble like a gunshot, sealing both the end of my marriage and my erasure from the company I had built with my own brilliance and grit. Applause thundered around me, each cheer like artillery fire. 300 guests celebrated the public demolition of my life, their laughter bouncing off walls that now felt like an arena designed for gladiatorial combat. I watched my husband embrace Christian as cameras flashed, immortalizing the moment my marriage was converted into a performance for corporate gain. The vintage Omega watch in my purse felt like dead weight, a $25,000 token of devotion to a man who had just traded me away for a better deal. 6 years of marriage dissolved into a single business calculation. I sat alone at the head table while guests congratulated the newly minted couple, expecting me to crack, to cry, scream, or collapse, anything to complete their spectacle. Instead, I chose silence, not the silence of defeat, but of defiance. My refusal to perform left the crowd unsettled, their anticipation curdled into discomfort as I stood, heels clicking against marble, walking toward the exit with deliberate grace. The gift box remained in my hands, no longer a gesture of love but evidence of the last kindness I would ever extend to a man who mistook my generosity for weakness and my partnership for submission. Behind me, Henry and Christian soaked in applause, basking in the illusion of victory. But their celebration would be short-lived. Tonight marked not my downfall, but the beginning of their education, an education in who truly controlled the company they believed they had just acquired. The elevator carried me 34 floors upward in silence, each passing level a step in my transformation from victim to strategist. Boston's city lights stretched across the horizon, millions of glowing windows reflecting lives carrying on as usual. While mine shifted into something unrecognizable, the Omega watch still pressed into my palm, no longer a gift, but a relic, the last gesture I would ever make as someone else's supporting character. At home, the penthouse no longer felt like a sanctuary. It became a command center for dismantling everything Henry thought he owned: the carefully curated furniture, the expensive art, the framed wedding photo. All revealed themselves as props in a show I had financed and scripted. While he played the leading man without realizing he was never the author, behind that smiling wedding portrait hung the wall safe. Inside, 6 years of meticulous documentation, incorporation papers with my signature as primary founder, Henry's name listed only as minority stakeholder, patent filings with my name as lead inventor on every innovation, bank records tracing our seed money to my grandmother's inheritance, her life savings invested not for spectacle, but for substance. Elena Santos had worked 3 jobs to build something that mattered. She left me her resources to continue her legacy of authentic achievement, and here it was, 6 to 7% ownership, staring back at me in black and white, proof that the public narrative of our partnership had always been a lie. These weren't just documents, they were weapons. Weapons I never thought I'd use against the man I once loved. The irony wasn't lost on me. Preparing to destroy him with the very protections I had built to secure our shared future, my laptop hummed to life, connecting to Nexus Dynamics financial systems with passwords only I knew. The security architecture I had designed to shield us from outside threats would now defend against betrayal from within. Spreadsheets laid out Henry's transformation in cold numbers. $207 million siphoned into personal expenses. Vacations disguised as business development, consulting fees routed through 5-star resorts, European investor tours that looked more like luxury holidays, Manhattan networking weekends costing more than some startups' annual budgets. Every transaction bled the company I had built. Each receipt told the same story: a man who confused access with ownership, who mistook my generosity for weakness. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as clarity settled in. I was the woman who had built the system, and ultimate authority was still mine. The safeguards I had designed would now serve justice. Every lock, every protocol, every security measure would become a scalpel in the surgical dismantling of Henry's illusion of control. The network shutdown began with surgical precision. each frozen account representing years of stolen credit and misplaced trust. Travel bookings disappeared from reservation systems as corporate credit cards lost authorization for future transactions. The European investor tour Henry had planned with Christian evaporated into digital nothingness. Along with hotel reservations, private jet charters and restaurant bookings that would have continued his performance of success, funded by my innovations. Corporate cards declined across multiple merchant systems as I revoked authorization for personal expenses that had master-aided as business development. The operational freeze locked $207 million behind protocols that required my personal approval, instantly transforming the celebrated Coco into someone who could not access the penny of the company he claimed to run. Each keystroke represented justice, served with mathematical precision, consequences delivered through systems I had designed. When partnership meant collaboration rather than my phone began buzzing with panicked calls as vendors, employees, and business partners discovered that Nexus Dynamics had suddenly become unavailable for all financial transactions. The frequency of notification suggested word was spreading quickly through networks of suppliers and service providers who depended on our company for payment. Henry's assistant markets would be fielding increasingly frantic inquiries about declined payments and frozen accounts, his explanations becoming more desperate as he realized the scope of the financial lockdown. The legal document I drafted represented the culmination of everything I had learned during years of building companies in protecting intellectual property. Each class was designed to systematically dismantle the life Henry had built on my work. Written with the same precision I once used to code our most complex algorithms, the terms would reshape his understanding of ownership, contribution, and consequence with legal language that left no room for negotiation or misinterpret immediate resignation. As co-CEO would strip away the title that had provided platform for accepting credit, he had never earned permanent ban on Christian's involvement with Nexus Dynamics would eliminate the external threat that had orchestrated tonight's corporate coup disguised as romantic theater. $207 million in structured repayment over 4 years would ensure accountability for every personal expense he had charged to company accounts while claiming to build our empire. Public acknowledgement of my true role as founder would correct the historical record that had celebrated him as visionary entrepreneur while relegating me to supporting character in my own success story. The comprehensive non-disclosure agreement would prevent him from writing memorials, giving interviews, or speaking at conferences about experiences he had never actually lived, innovations he had never created, or business decisions he had never made. The envelope sat sealed on our coffee table, like a legal explosive device containing mathematical proof that actions have consequences and that the woman who built the theater retains authority to decide who performs on its stage. Each page represented justice, served with precision that would make my grandmother proud. Accountability delivered through documentation that proved authentic. Achievement always overcomes borrowed glory when legal reality confronts manufactured perception. The combination of technical expertise, legal knowledge, and financial control I possessed would now serve purposes I had never intended when building systems designed to protect rather than punish. But Henry had chosen performance over partnership, and Christian had orchestrated humiliation, disguised as entertainment. Now they would both discover that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns. The morning sun cast geometric patterns across our marble force through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the sealed envelope that would reshape Henry's understanding of ownership. In consequence, I had slept surprisingly well for someone who had just orchestrated the systematic dismantling of her husband's empire, the peace of finally taking action, replacing years of growing resentment with something approaching satisfaction. My coffee tasted better than I had in months, each step representing freedom from pretending that performance and partnership are equivalent. The intercom buzzed precisely 9:15 Patrick voice, carrying through the speaker with professional concern that suggested unusual circumstances. Mrs. Martinez, there's a gentleman here from Nexus Dynamics, Marcus Webb. He seems quite distressed and insists he needs to speak with you immediately about urgent company matters. The timing was perfect. allowing Henry's assistant to discover the scope of last night's consequences during normal business hours when the impact would reverberate through every venture partner and starhoves who depended on our company for financial transactions. Marcus emerged from the elevator looking like someone who had survived a natural disaster, his usually immaculate appearance replaced by rumpled clothes and the wild-eyed desperation of a man whose professional world had collapsed overnight. His designer's suit, typically pressed to perfection, showed wrinkles that suggested he had slept tea in his office while fielding increasingly panicked calls from vendors whose payments had mysteriously evaporated. Dark circles under his eyes indicated the kind of sleepless night that comes from discovering that systems you thought you understood were actually controlled by someone else entirely. "Miss Martinez," he said, his voice cracking with exhaustion and barely controlled panic. "We have a situation. Multiple situations. Everything is frozen." He clutched a coffee up with hands that shook so violent I worried he might drop it on our marble floor. The caffeine clearly insufficient to combat whatever pharmacy ticket assistance he had needed to function after discovering the scope of his employer's financial paralysis. I gesture-read for him to sit on our Italian leather sofa. Noting how he punched on the edge like someone prepared to flee at the first sign of additional bad news, "Tell me exactly what you've discovered," I said, settling into the opposite chair with the calm authority of someone who knew precisely what information he would provide because I had designed every aspect of the crisis he was experiencing. The corporate credit card started declining around midnight. Marcus began, his words tumbling over each other with the desperation of someone delivering bad news to the only person who might possess solutions. Hotel reservations for the European investor tour were cancelled automatically. The payroll system shows insufficient authorization for this week's employee payments. Vendor invoices are being rejected by our accounting software. Even basic office supply orders are getting declined. His face cycled through confusion, recognition, and growing horror as he continued cataloging the financial apocalypse. The conference room book for today's emergency board meeting was cancelled because our corporate account couldn't process the payment. 3 investors have already called, asking why their money transfers for the new funding round are showing authorization errors, and Christian Backwood's office has been calling every hour, demanding explanations for why her consulting fee payment was reversed. "Can you fix this?" he pleaded, still believing this represented a technical glitch rather than precision warfare designed by the woman who had built every system he was describing. Henry said, "You would know how to restore access to the operational accounts." He mentioned something about security protocols you design in that might have malfunctioned during last night's network updates. I watched his growing horror as understanding dawned that he was not dealing with technical failures, but with consequences for actions taken at last night's gala. "Marcus," I said, with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child, "there are no technical glitches. There are no malfunction security protocols. The system is working exactly as I designed it to work." The envelope containing Henry's terms of surrender sat on our coffee table, like legal ordinances, each page representing the systematic dismantling of assumptions about ownership, authority, and access that had governed Nexus dynamics for the past 6 years. I handed the sealed packet to Marcus, watching his face transform as he realized he was carrying a corporate death sentence disguised as legal documentation. "Tell Henry the system is working exactly as designed," I said, with the calm authority of someone who had spent 6 years watching her innovations attributed to others while funding their lifestyle through algorithms they could not understand or replicate. These documents contained his new reality. He has 24 hours to respond. Marcus accepted the envelope like someone handling radioactive material, his hands trembling as he understood that he was carrying news that would redefine Henry's relationship with the company he thought he controlled. "What should I tell the employees, the vendors, the investors who are demanding explanations for declined payments and cancelled meetings?" "Tell them the truth," I replied. "Tell them that sometimes when you mistake access for ownership, you discover that the person who built the system retains ultimate authority over how IT operates. Tell them that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns." The elevator doors closed on a man who finally understood that supporting character, sometimes their own scripts, his footsteps echoing through the hallway as he carried news that would transform Henry's understanding of who actually owned the empire he had claimed to run. Marcus looked like a messenger in a war zone, which in many ways accurately described his new role in the corporate conflict. That was just beginning. My phone had been buzzing constantly since 6 this morning. The notifications creating a digital symphony of panic as Henry's world crumbled in real time. 27 missed calls within the first 3 hours, each representing another piece of his carefully constructed facade falling apart as vendors, partners, and investors discovered that their golden boy could not access the funds needed to maintain his professional reputation. Christian Blackwood's name appeared repeatedly between calls from board members who are learning that last night's romantic theater had been performed without understanding the financial architecture that made such gestures possible. Investment partners were discovering that their new business relationship with Henry depended on resources. He had never actually controlled corporate accounts that required authorization from someone who had no intention of enabling their continued. I silenced the device and placed IT face down on our dining table. Saverin, the mathematical precision of consequences unfolding exactly as I had designed them. The quiet in our pence felt sacred after years of noise and performance. The first genuine peace I had experiences since Henry forgot that partnerships require recognition rather than systematic erasure. Each unanswered call represented justice, served with Albertha efficiency, accountability delivered through systems I had built when trustful collaboration, rather than the business partners who had celebrated Henry's transformation from married entrepreneur to available acquisition target, were discovering that corporate romance required resources the lover had never possessed. Christian's investment strategy was unraveling as he learned that Henry's access to Nexus Dynamics operational funds had been a privilege rather than a right authorization that could be by the person who had actually built the company being acquired. The afternoon passed in contemplative satisfaction as I reviewed patent applications for innovations that would revolutionize machine learning applications in healthcare diagnostics. My technical work continued with focused intensity that had been missing during years of watching Henry, except credit for breakthroughs could not explain to investors who assumed his public recognition reflected actual expertise rather than borrowed glory. At 11:45 that evening, desperate knocking echoed through our penthouse as Henry returned home, transformed from tech royalty to emotional wreckage. The sound carried the frantic ahem of someone whose perfect plan had become perfect disaster, whose corporate acquisition disguised as romance had backfired with mathematical precision that left no room for negotiation or appeal. I opened the door to find a man who had spent 12 hours calling lawyers, accountants, and anyone else who might explain how his carefully orchestrated coup had resulted in complete financial paralysis. His designer suit showed wrinkles that suggested he had been sleeping in his office, his confident demeanor replaced by wild desperation that made him almost unrecognizable as the person who had accepted Christiana's proposal with such authority less than 24 hours earlier. "You cannot destroy us like this," he whispered the words, revealing fundamental delusion that they remained in us to destroy when in reality, there had not been genuine partnership for years. Only performance art funded by my innovation and protected by his willful blindness to mathematical truth about ownership and contribution. Henry stepped across the threshold of our pens like a man entering his own tub, his designer suit wrinkled beyond recognition, and his confident demeanor completely shattered the elevator ride up. 30 Force had apparently given him time to rehearse explanations that sounded increasingly desperate with each word he spoke. His hands shook as he closed the door behind him, the simple action requiring visible effort from someone whose world had collapsed in the span of 12 hours. "Isabella, we need to talk," he said, his voice carrying the hollow authority of someone who had forgotten that authority requires actual power rather than assumed privilege. The marble floors amplified each footstep as he moved through our living room, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against surfaces that my algorithms had purchased while he attended networking dinners disguised as strategic planning sessions. I remained seated on our sofa, The legal documents spread across the coffee table between us like evidence in a corporate trial. The vintage Omega watch sat unopened beside the surrender terms, its velvet box serving as a reminder of how completely I had misunderstood my role in Tonight Performance until discovering the truth about months of coordinated deception. "You have to understand." Henry began, his words tumbling over each other with the desperation of someone whose carefully rehearsed explanations were trembling under pressure. "Christ's proposal was not what it seemed. He was a test, a way to make you fight for our marriage and prove your commitment to our partnership." She said, "You had become too comfortable, too complacent about what we built together." The delusion embedded in his explanation cut deeper than any betrayal could have managed. I watched him pace our living room while constructing elaborate justifications for systematic humiliation, his mind apparently capable of transforming corporate acquisition strategy into relationship therapy through sheer force of denial. The man who had stood on stage accepting congratulations for my innovations was now trying to convince me that public devastation had been designed for my own benefit. "Henry," I said, my voice steady with the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student, "you spent $207 million of my money. The math is not complicated." The documentation spread across our coffee table told a story that no amount of creative explanation could alter. Each receipt represented corporate funds treated as personal checking accounts, every authorization, revealing a pattern of systematic exploit that had funded his lifestyle. While I worked 18-hour days to generate the revenue, he was spending European investor tours that cost more than most companies' annual budgets, Caribbean strategy retreats disguised as business development, Manhattan networking events that achieved nothing beyond building his social connections at my company's expense. "That was our money," Henry protested, his voice rising with each failed attempt to justify the unjustifiable. "Joint assets from our shared success partnership means sharing resources and opportunities." I pulled out the incorporation papers I had drafted using Harvard law expertise. He had never possessed the legal language. Establishing ownership percentages that contradicted every assumption about our business relationship. "I own 67% of Next Dynamics. You own 33%. These documents bear my signature as primary founder, while your name appears only as minority stakeholder." Patent filings detailed every innovation that generated our wealth, each bearing my name as primary inventor, alongside technical descriptions that proved Dial 1 possessed the expertise to create breakthrough algorithms. Bank records showed my grandmother's inheritance as initial funding that has transformed his ambitious ideas into operational reality. Every dollar traced directly to investments I had made when partnership meant collaboration rather than systematic. "The company belongs to both of us," Henry insisted, though his protests crumbled against mathematical evidence. That ownership was not determined by public relations campaigns or magazine profiles. 6 years of building this together, 6 years of shared sacrifice and mutual support. "Shared sacrifice?" I asked, noting how the phrase sounded increasingly hollow when applied to someone whose contributions had consisted primarily of accepting credit for work he could not replicate or explain. "You built a reputation on innovations you cannot debug, G. You gave keynote speeches about algorithms you cannot understand. You accepted awards for breakthrough you did not create." The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Technical documentation proved that every system generating our revenue had been designed during my sleepless nights of coding, while Henry managed strategic partnerships at exclusive conferences. Financial records showed that every dollar of initial funding had come from my grandmother's inheritance invested in a company that honored her legacy of authentic achievement rather than borrowed glory. When Henry suggested using Christian's recorded proposal as leverage against her, I pulled out my phone and deleted the video in front of him, watching his last hope for redemption disappear into digital nothingness. The action was deliberate and final, demonstrating that I possess something far more powerful than embarrassing footage. "I do not need black," Marley told him, my voice carrying the steady authority of someone who held ownership papers. patent filings and 6 years of documentation proving exactly who built this company and who merely pretended to run IT. I have mathematical truth. His face crumbled as understanding finally penetrated the elaborate justifications he had constructed to avoid confronting his own irrelevance to the company's actual operations. The video deletion was not mercy, but strategy, proof that I did not need to destroy others to reclaim what had always been mine through innovation. Funding and legal ownership. The surrender document represented the culmination of everything I had learned about protecting intellectual property and corporate governance. Each clause was written with surgical precision, designed to systematically dismantle the life Henry had built on my work, while ensuring he could never again exploit innovations he had not created or funding he had not provided. "You cannot be serious about these terms," Henry said, his voice breaking as he read through immediate resignation as co-CEO, permanent ban on Christians' involvement, $207 million and structured repayment, public acknowledged of my true role as founder, and comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would silence him completely. "Every law reflects the mathematical reality of ownership and contribution," I replied, watching him struggle with concepts that should have been obvious to anyone actually involved in building a company, rather than merely performing the role of successful entrepreneur. "Sign the documents or face litigation that will make tonight." Financial freeze. Seen generous. Henry's hands trembled as he signed each page, his pen moving with the desperate efficiency of someone who finally understood they had been playing poker with Casso owner. Every initial and signature represented another piece of his carefully constructed identity, crumbling under the weight of legal reality, each clause cutting away access to empire I had built while he managed strategic partnerships at 5-star resorts. I watch him accept terms that would reshape his understanding of ownership contribution. In consequence, the resignation stripped away titles that had provided platform for accepting credit he had never earned. The finance special repayment ensured accountability for every personal expense charged to company accounts. The public acknowledged would correct historical records that had celebrated him as visionary entrepreneur while relegating me to supporting character in my own success story. The comprehensive non-disclosure agreement represented perhaps the most devastating clause. Preventing him from riding means giving interviews or speaking at conference about experiences he had never actually lived. The man who had built his reputation on borrowed glory would spend the next 5 years in enforced silence. Unable to monetize stories about innovations he had not created or business decisions he had not made, the documents became his confession, a legal admission that 6 years of stolen credit were finally being returned to their rightful owner. Each signature acknowledged that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns, that authentic achievement always prevails when legal reality confronts manufactured perception. As Henry completed the final signature, the transformation from celebrated entrepreneur to minority stakeholder in a company he had never actually controlled with, complete the perfect life we had constructed together, revealed itself as performance art. Funded by my innovation and protected by his willful blindness to ownership, documents that had always told a different story than the one he presented to investors and business journalists, the signed documents lay scattered across our coffee table, like the remnants of Henry's former identity, each page bearing his signature, acknowledging the mathematical reality of ownership and contribution that had always governed Nexus dynamics. His departure from our Penn TSE felt Antcliffe after the systematic dismantling of everything he thought he controlled, the elevator doors, closing on a man who finally understood the difference between access and authority, between performance and actual achievement. The emergency board meeting convened at 8 in the morning, barely 6 hours after Henry had signed his surrender. The glasswork conference room on the 32nd floor of our office building felt like a corporate tribunal where the verdict had already been decided, 10 board members arranging themselves around the mahogany table with expressions ranging from confusion to carefully concealed panic. Their expensive suits and practice confidence could not mask the fundamental uncertainty of people who had just discovered they had been supporting the wrong player in a game whose rules they had never actually understood. I entered the bedroom with the manila folder containing the complete restructuring of Nexus Dynamics, my heels clicking against marble force, with the measured awahem of justice finally being served. The board members who had spent 6 years deferred to Henry's charm and networking abilities now faced the woman who had actually built the company. They thought they were governing their nervous glances, suggesting belated recognition of how completely they had misunderstood the power dynamics within their own organization. "Good morning," I said, settling into the chair at the head of the table that had always belonged to me by right of majority ownership. Though I had allowed Henry to occupy IT for appearances that no longer mattered, we have significant changes to discuss regarding Nexus dynamics, leadership structure, and operational authority. Margaret Chin, our longest-serving board member, spoke first with the careful tone of someone navigating unexpectedly treacherous territory. "Isabella, we understand there have been some developments following last night's Gala. Henry mentioned urgent matters requiring board attention. But he was somewhat unclear about specifics. The understatement would have been amusing if the situation had not been so serious. Henry, 12 hours of frantic phone calls to lawyers, accountants, and crisis management consultants, had apparently failed to produce coherent explanations for the systematic financial paralysis that had transformed Nexus Dynamics from operational company to corporate ghost. Overnight, Henry Martinez has submitted his immediate resignation. As Coco of Nexus Dynamics, I announced, my voice carrying the ical precision of someone delivering a medical diagnosis, effective immediately. I am assuming sole control of all company operations with comprehensive veto authority over expenditure, strategic partnerships, and personal decisions. The silence that followed felt heavy with implications that board members were only beginning to calculate 6 years of difference to Henry's public persona, had created assumptions about authority and decision-making that were now crumbling under the weight of legal documentation that told a completely different story about ownership and control. Furthermore, I continued, noting how each sentence cut through the boardroom room's tension like a scalable Christian Blackwood, and all entities associated with her investment group are permanently banned from any involvement with Nexus Dynamics, including consulting arrangements, partnership discussions, or casual contact with company personnel. The corporate death sentence hung in the air while board members began calculating how this fundamental reshuffling would affect their own positions, stock options, and professional reputations. The mathematical elegance of ownership papers was overcoming years of public relations and networking, proving that documentation defeats charm when legal reality collides with manufactured perception. David Park, our technology advisor, cleared his throat with obvious discomfort. These are significant changes. Perhaps we should schedule additional meetings to discuss the implications and ensure proper transition procedures." I opened the manila folder and distributed copies of the incorporation papers, patent filings, and financial records that had always governed our company's actual structure. "The documents you are reviewing established that I owned 67% of Nexus Dynamics, while Henry owns 33%. Every innovation generating our revenue bears my name as primary inventor. All initial funding came from my personal resources." The revelation transformed the boardroom atmosphere as sophisticated investors discovered they had totally misunderstood the company they had been advising for years. Patent filings proved that breakthrough algorithms credited to visionary leadership had actually been developed by someone they had treated as supportive spouse rather than brilliant entrepreneur. "Henry will be making a public statement to correct the historical record," I announced. Producing the confession he had signed hours earlier, the statement acknowledges my role as founder, architect, and majority stakeholders of Nexus Dynamics, along with his resignation from all operational responsibilities. The document I read aloud became Henry's final humiliation as board members listened to a complete confession that dissolved 6 years of stolen credit in carefully crafted paragraphs. His voice, recorded during our pintail confrontation, cracked with each admission that he had been the spokesperson. While I did the actual work of building something meaningful, I acknowledge that Isabel Martinez is the true founder and majority owner of Nexus Dynamics. The statement read, "SHE core algorithms filed our patent and made the strategic decisions that built this company. I served as public representative while SHE provided the technical expertise and innovative vision that generated our success." Board members watched in fascination and horror as the confession continued, transforming a celebrated entrepreneur into corporate fraud in the space of a single press release. Each paragraph represented a nail in the coffin of Henry's carefully constructed reputation, demonstrating that mathematical truth eventually overcomes even the most sophisticated public relations campaigns. The technical innovations credited to our leadership team were designed and implemented by Israel Martinez during 18-hour development cycles, while I managed external relationships and investor communications. Her contributions to artificial intelligence in machine learning represent genuine breakthrough achievements that I had the privilege of presenting to business audiences. The confession became a masterclass in consequence. Proof that authentic achievement always prevails when legal reality confronts manufactured perception. Board members realized they were witnessing the systematic correction of historical records that had celebrated borrowed glory, while diminishing actual innovation. As sole CEO of Nexus Dynamics, my first executive decisions prioritized substance over style, placing champagne-fueled networking events with actual engineering excellence and meaningful innovation. The employees who had worked under Henry's regime discovered what is meant to have leadership that understood the technology they were developing, the relief palpable as technical discussions became substantive rather than superficial performance art, effective immediately. We are restructuring our development priorities to focus on breakthrough applications rather than public relations opportunities. I announced to the engineering teams who had been marginalized while Henry chased magazine covers and conference speaking engagements, "Your technical expertise will guide our strategic direction rather than being to networking and social media considerations." The office atmosphere transformed from performance art to productive collaboration within hours of Henry's departure. Engineers who had been presenting complex ideas to someone who could only smile and nod during technical reviews suddenly found themselves working with leadership that could debug their code, optimize their algorithms, and contribute meaningfully to problem-solving discussions. Sa Kim, my former assistant who possessed one of the most brilliant minds in machine learning optimization, accepted promotion to Chief Technology Officer with enthusiasm that had been suppressed during years of watching her innovations attributed to Henry's visionary leadership. Her first presentation to the board detailed breakthrough developments in neural network architecture that would revolutionize predictive analytics across multiple industries. The transformation of Nexus Dynamics from corporate theater to authentic innovation hub felt like restoration rather than revolution. Returning the company to principles that had originally motivated my grandmother's investment in meaningful achievement rather than borrowed glory. Mathematical truth had finally overcome manufactured perception, establishing operational priorities based on genuine expertise rather than social media presence. The board meeting concluded with unanimous OU's approval of the leadership transition, their signatures acknowledging that they had been governing a company they had never actually understood until legal documentation forced recognition of ownership structures that had always told a different story than the one presented to business journalists and industry publications. The board members filed out of the conference room with the subdued efficiency that follows major corporate restructuring. Their conversations muted as they progressed the fundamental shift in leadership in the revelation that they had been advising a company they had never truly understood. The glass walls of our executive floor reflected the morning sunlight streaming through Boston's financial district, illuminating an office space that would now operate according to principles of authentic innovation rather than performance, our disguise aired as entrepreneurship. 9 months later, I found myself standing in a completely different kitchen, brewing coffee with equipment I had purchased myself, rather than corporate accounts funded by algorithms I had coded during sleepiness nights. The Cambridge Tough House represented everything. The backbone penthouse had not comfort over appearances, functionality over Instagram potential, genuine satisfaction over manufactured luxury. Each piece of furniture reflected choices made for personal preference rather than investor impressions, creating spaces designed for living rather than performing. The morning light filtered through windows I could open to actual fresh air, a simple pleasure that had been impossible in the climate-controlled environment of our former penthouse. The coffee maker was a modest German model that produced excellent results without requiring technical expertise or pretentious explanations about single beans and artisan roasting processes. Everything in my new environment reflected values that, Ortiz's substance over style, authenticity over appearances. My MIT visiting professor had connected me with graduate students whose genuine curiosity about machine learning frameworks reminded me why I had fallen in love with programming before. But IT became entangled with patterns, profit margins, and public relations campaigns. These young minds approached complex algorithms with the same passion I had experienced during my early coding sessions. When breakthrough technology felt like art and elegant solutions represented pure intellectual satisfaction, Professor Martinez, your approach to neural network optimization has opened entirely new research directions for our healthcare applications, said David Liu, a doctor candidate whose dissertation would revolutionize diagnostic imaging through artificial intelligence. His enthusiasm for technical excellence rather than networking opportunities represented everything I had paid to find in academic collaboration. The absence of staff, marble countertops, and performance are disguised as domestic life had created space for the quiet satisfaction of finally matching my environment to my actual values. No longer did I wake up in surroundings designed to impress visitors who viewed my home as a set piece in someone else's success story. Every detail of my new life reflected authentic choices rather than corporate image management. Quantum labs represented everything. Henry's version of Nexus Dynamics had never been substance over style, innovation over networking, solutions over social media presence. Dr. Sarah M.'s leadership of the Distributed Computing Initiative had attracted contracts with 3 major healthcare systems and 2 Fortune 500 companies, their success measured in solved problems rather than magazine profiles or conference keynotes. The $50 million investment I had made in quantum labs generated returns measured in human impact rather than shareholder value. Funding research that would revolutionize medical diagnosis and treatment rather than producing quarterly reports designed to impress who had never understood the technology they were funding. Watching brilliant minds collaborate on breakthrough applications reminded me of my own early days when code was poetry and technological innovation represented art, rather than business strategy. The distributed computing framework. We developed a reduced diagnostic imaging processing time from hours to minutes, Sarah explained. During our quarterly review meeting, 3 hospitals are already reporting improved patient outcomes through faster identification of critical conditions. Her passion for technical excellence rather than public recognition represented the kind of leadership I should have been supporting all along instead of funding Henry's transformation from entrepreneur to corporate celebrity through innovations he could not understand or replicate. The handwritten letter from Henry arrived on a Tuesday morning. His careful script acknowledging recognition that had come too late to preserve the relationship he had systematically destroyed through years of systematic credit theft. The Portent Community College, where he now taught entrepreneurship, provided modest compensation that reflected his actual contributions to business education, rather than borrowed glory from innovations he had never created. I realize now that you try to teach me the difference between being important and being authentic. For years he wrote in handwriting that looked older than his actual age, suggesting the kind of stress that comes from discovering that your entire professional identity was built on foundation someone else had constructed. I apologize that it took losing everything to finally understand what you meant about genuine achievement versus performance art. His modest department in reduced circumstances represented natural consequences of building a career on borrowed innovation rather than personal expertise. His belated recognition of my contributions, carrying the weight of someone who finally understood what he had lost through his own choices. The $207 million repayment plan was progressive according to schedule. Each monthly payment representing accountability for corporate funds he had treated as personal checking accounts while I built the empire he had aimed to run. Christian's situation provided its own lesson in due diligence. As he explained to limited partners how her acquisition strategy had backfired when he failed to research actual ownership structures before orchestrating public humiliation designed to transfer control of the company, he had never actually understood. Her reputation remained intact, but her business model had been permanently damaged by assumptions that public perception equals legal reality, when corporate documentation tells a different story. The Martinez acquisition demonstrates the importance of comprehensive ownership research before implementing partnership strategies. SHE had written in a carefully worded statement to investors who were questioning her judgment after discovering that her romantic theater had been performed without understanding the mathematical foundations of the company SHE had attempted to acquire. Standing in my honest kitchen, I understood that the best revenge had never been about destroying others, but about finally living authentically on my own terms, building meaningful things with people who actually care about outcomes rather than appearances. The vintage Omega watch still sat unopened on my counter, a $25,000 reminder of the last gesture I had made as someone else's supporting character before choosing to write my own script according to values, prioritize genuine accomplishment over borrowed glory. Henry and Christian had faced consequences that reflected their own choices, but my victory was not their punishment. It was my reconstruction of a life based on authentic achievement rather than corporate performance art. The mathematics had worked perfectly. Actions plus consequences equal justice, served with the precision that only comes from understanding that the person who builds the system gets to decide how IT operates. The morning routine in my Cambridge Tom house represented everything I had hoped to achieve through years of building technology that mattered: the quiet satisfaction of meaningful work, genuine relationships with people who valued substance over style, and the peace that comes from finally matching your environment to your actual values rather than someone else's expectations. My grandmother's inheritance had funded authentic innovation rather than borrow-road gory, honoring her memory through breakthrough technology that solved real problems, instead of generating magazine profiles for people who had never understood the algorithms they claimed to have created. Alina Santos would have been proud to see her granddaughter finally claiming credit for work that represented genuine contribution to human knowledge rather than performance art disguised as entrepreneurship. The coffee tasted better when brewed with equipment purchased through honest earnings, rather than corporate accounts funded by innovations attributed to someone else. Each morning represented another day of living authentically, rather than performing rules designed to make other people successful through my invisible contributions. The mathematics of justice had proven that genuine achievement always prevails when legal documentation confronts manufactured perception, and sometimes the best revenge is simply being right while having the evidence to prove it. If this story of calculated corporate revenge kept you captivated from start to finish, please hit that like button to show your support. My favorite moment was when Isabella discovered those text messages between Henry and Christian, realizing that her entire marriage had been reduced to a business strategy. What was your most memorable scene from Isabella's journey? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Make sure you never miss stories of justice served with mathematical precision. Subscribe and activate that notification bell for all our latest uploads. Well, that's all for today's story. If you like this video, please subscribe. We will continue to update more exciting stories and look forward to seeing you next time.